Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back. Just coming back with some tutorials for how to play the Magicka Necromancer. I hear a lot of things going on reading the forums, and of course I've watched quite a few YouTube videos on the Magicka Necromancer just to see, kind of get a feel of what the community thinks about the class. And I would say I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding about how viable the class is, and whether the class is completely garbage or whether it just needs some minor tweaks to make it a bit more viable for PvP. This is the current build that I'm running, just so you can get an idea of what the stats look like, what the skills look like. Really quickly, the build, of course, is located here with quite a bit of detail. This is my Necromancer, the Warmonger, with a little bit of information about how I built, the way I built, of course the reason for the gear sets, and of course the traits with gameplay, and of course my initial thoughts of what I thought about the class for PvP. With that said, I did want to have a little bit of a discussion of why I built the way I built. More information on the website. I built primarily for burst damage. There are many different ways that you can build a Magicka Necromancer. You can take advantage of abilities, for example, like Boneyard. If, for example, you were, say, you wanted to run maybe like a control / conditional build, you could actually do that, taking advantage of, for example, using abilities from like Destro, using Wall of Elements. If you were using a Ice Staff to create a bit of areas of slow, you can also use that, of course, with Ghostly Embrace. That also does a slow and a root, and so you could either use Ghostly Embrace and then maybe use like a Fire Staff and use the Fire Elemental or the Lightning if you were looking to do, for example, AoE damage and you wanted to take advantage of the Boneyard ability. You could, in theory, do that and make it somewhat viable for PvP, either in Battlegrounds or in group. Again, that is a condition. Of course, you would be utilizing the Unnerving Boneyard so that those who are trapped in the area would also have their physical and spell resistance reduced. And of course, you would set that up first with a blast bomb so that the corpse would fall, and then you would drop your Unnerving on top of the corpse. This would be a mid-range to melee ranged sort of gameplay. This is not a far back and drop your AoEs on the ground. This is a more mid to close range type of play style, where you would be still be utilizing the blast bones, but you would be utilizing them up close for the corpse on the ground, so that you could do more damage with your Unnerving. And of course, you would keep people slowed and rooted via Ghostly Embrace. And then of course you could use the other morph of the Mystic Siphon, and you would basically drop your AoEs on the ground, slow everybody, root them, and then of course you would move through them and then recreate another blast bone, and then of course take advantage of the tether. So you would stay mobile, moving back and forth, making sure your AoEs are down, making sure people are slowed and rooted, and of course readjusting them where they need to be as you go. And of course you would also have a ground AoE from whichever, I guess, weapon, whether you're using fire or if you're using a shock staff, a lightning staff, to take advantage of the extra AoE damage. And then of course you would be using the Unnerving, and then of course you'd be using Totem. With a gameplay like that, you could take advantage of the Agony Totem in group play, where you would just, especially if you were either in a pre-made or if you were doing some open world Cyrodiil, you would let people know, hey, I'm running at Totem. Just be sure that when I root everybody, so for example I walk in, slow everybody, drop my Totem, and of course it would CC everybody, and then of course your allies would synergize it, and of course that would give you a little bit of extra damage from the Agony Totem morph, because you wouldn't really use the remote totem. You would use the agony one so that you got a little bit of extra damage from this energy, as well as the reduction to damage for you and your group, as well as, of course, the AoE damage from those synergizing your boneyard. With that said, you could also make use of, for example, the AoE heal, which would be the braided tether, so that would give you group utility. And then, of course, you could use things like either the AoE heal, or you could use, for example, like I said, the other morph of the tether, because the purpose is to create these large areas of denial, and of course to create a lot of ground effects. You could also use the Mystic Siphon, and of course, because the skeleton does some AoE damage, you could take advantage of course, the Skeletal Mage, while giving, of course, your group some utility from the Agony Boneyard, as well as either, you know, whichever morph of the Colossus that you choose to use. One does the stun, the other one does a little bit more damage. Of course, whichever morph you choose to use for your playstyle is, of course, entirely up to you. There might be some other abilities that you could make use of. Maybe using bats if you wanted to go with that as an ultimate, and then of course you could use, where is it here? Taking advantage of the amount of ultimate that you can regenerate with a Necromancer. You could go bats. You can go vampire and utilize bats, and you would have a pretty good amount of uptime, especially if you were, for example, a Nord, right? If you had the Stalwart passive, plus you were paying attention and making the most use out of the necrotic potency morph, where you would have access to dropping multiple corpses from, of course, summon here, and of course your blast bone, as well as the intensive mender, and of course the mage. So you have a lot of ultimate that would be coming in, and you would be making use of bats into areas of denial, and that's an entire way that you could play as a Magicka Necromancer that would be viable. You do a lot of damage over time, conditions with roots, slows, and of course synergies for your team to utilize that would, of course, heal you. So that's one sort of route that you could go for this particular class. The route that I chose to go was basically the ranged spellcaster for high amounts of burst damage, which is the way I chose to run this. I am running in 5 light currently, and I'm switching this out to 2 heavy. You could run 5-1-1 if you wanted for the max stats. It's entirely up to you. I did make one particular change that I did post to the website, was that previously I was running 2 pieces of Ice Heart. I have subsequently chosen to not run the 2 pieces of the Ice Heart because I felt it was too conditional, and I'm recommending either one Mighty Chuden, a Pirate Skeleton, or a Lord Warden, whichever works for you. I prefer Julianos and Willows, and of course my gear, my traits and everything are down there, along with a bit of detail, of course, of why I went the route that I did. If you want to take a look at what the ability damage for this particular build does, as you can see right here, your Ricochet has a tooltip, and this is just with the light attack on the back bar for the weapon glyph. These are the tooltips. Your Ricochet is coming in at 65. Excuse me. Flame Reach is 30, just about 38 for the initial hit, 55 for the dot. Your Blast Bone is coming in at just about 11,000, and of course the intensive mender, as you can see, the tooltip there is 6,300 every 2 seconds, and of course I'm running Inner Light. I'm using Channeled Acceleration. I've switched back to Ghostly Embrace for the root, which makes it a lot easier to set up for a Colossus ultimate. I'm going with the Mortal Coil for the stamina return. Even though I have really good stamina recovery, the Mortal Coil provides you just about a little over 470 in terms of regen. This is why I utilize this morph, so that I can have access to maybe more dodge rolls, situational blocking, and of course entropy, and I'm using Summoner's Armor on the back bar. I have on occasion tried using the anime Blast Bones, and it does work well. It does work well in terms of course, rezzing and of course summoning 3 of the Blast Bones. I have used it. It's definitely an interesting concept. I think I would rather go with the Sigil Order ability, so that when I switch to my back bar, I have a little bit of extra mitigation via Temporal Guard. That would be my little bit of advice in terms of playing with this particular build to make it a little bit more tanky. I chose this morph for the longer durations, and I'm willing to, because I run such high recovery, I can dodge roll a little more out of roots and be able to CC break even with only 11.4k stam, and I feel comfortable. Because in a fight, I'm realistically around 1700 stamina recovery. I have really good Magicka recovery, just coming in at 1900, and of course my health recovery is just about 1160, running 41% crit, and my spell damage is just about 3370, and you can see right here I am running pretty high spell critical damage. So when I do crit, 40% of the time I am going to crit, I'm going to crit very hard. And of course, as my opponent gets lower, I'm going to be basically taking advantage of the passive here from Death Kneel, which is it increases your critical strikes chance against enemies under 25% health by 10% for each Grave Lord ability. And of course I'm running 1, 2, and 3, so that gives us an extra 30% to our critical. So when people are getting low, you're literally going to be critting them every time while they're below 25%, which is basically how you are executing people. I've hit people, I think I said in a previous video, I hit someone who was really low for about 9.1k. If you haven't had the chance, you can see that in the previous video that I uploaded. I'll put the link at the top so you can take a look at that. Take a look at the gameplay. You can see what kind of damage I'm doing. Of course, in that video, I still don't have all of my passives. I'm still missing quite a few of my Destro and a couple of my light armor passives, and of course I am missing Undaunted on that build as well, and I don't have all of my what's it called, Mages Guild passives as well. So I'm missing quite a bit of max magic. I'm missing about almost 3800 max Magicka, and of course I'm missing, you know, a lot of the passives that would cause me to do a bit more damage. So this is basically the build that I run. There's numerous different play styles that you can create. Either you want to run a tank, a healer, you want to run a support. If you want to run a sort of area denial debuffer class, you can do that with the Magicka Necromancer and still do very good damage, as the Boneyard fully buffed really does have a decent tooltip to it. If for example you were running a build similar to what I'm running, you can take a look at what the tooltip would be for that ability. For the Unnerving, you're coming in at just about 20,000 over 10 seconds, which is literally a 10,000 in no CP BGs, and that's literally 1,000 a tick. And on top of that, if there is a corpse there, it deals an additional 20%, and of course you gain access to the Major Breach as well as the reduction to physical resistance. And of course it has a pretty decent tooltip on the synergy, coming in at just about 9,500. So either you can run this morph or you can run the other morph, and either way you would be doing some fairly good damage. You'll get some really nice ticks between this, and then of course if you were using a Destro staff and you were using, you know, either I would probably run the unstable version if you were not using a nice staff, and that's just so that you're gaining the little bit of burst damage, because it does the exact same amount of damage over time. This one just does it over a longer period of time. This one makes up for that damage by the end burst that you see right there in the tooltip at 2523. So you could run this ability with whatever staff that you feel comfortable doing, whether using an ice staff or using a little bit of frost damage. It says the unstable wall of fire deals additional damage to burning targets. So I believe it does an additional 20%. So if that was the case, and if you were running that, then you would run either a fire glyph on the front bar so that you would have a higher chance of proccing the burning status to do extra damage. And of course, that's basically running a build for the purpose of creating ground AoEs and area denials with slows and roots, and of course utilizing your blast bones to create tethers for either the mortal coil or the other AoE morph, because for that build you would probably be surrounded by multiple opponents. Of course, you'd stick close with your team, and the other morph of course does AoE healing. I hear and I've read people that say that this ability is fairly shitty. I could not disagree more. This is one of the best options that you have for healing outside of Intensive Mender. Whatever build that you're playing with the Magicka or Necromancer, I cannot recommend this ability anymore. If you feel comfortable just running 1200 stamina and you feel that you can sustain, go with the other morph to offer your team a little bit more of utility via the braided tether. And of course the braided tether will do AoE healing for the tooltip there. As you can see, the tooltip is just shy of 20k, right? So what does that look like in the terms of region, right? It's over the course of 12 seconds, so that means you're getting 6 ticks. It's roughly 10k. So because it lasts 12 seconds, it comes in at half-second intervals. But just to compare it to health recovery, it's 6 ticks, right? Because it's 12 seconds, so in terms of region, it's 6 ticks. So you would divide the 10,000. Again, that's because in PvP this is going to be cut in half, and so divided by 6, that would give you an extra 1600 in HP recovery, and that is not including what you get from the Intensive Mender, which literally is an additional 3,100. So that would put you on this build. You get 1600 plus an additional 1159 plus an additional 3100 from the Mender, putting your HP recovery at 4252. That is a lot of HP recovery. This is why I say that Magicka Necromancer doesn't need heals. I mean, it doesn't need a damage shield, because you have so much healing coming in that it's very difficult, especially because if you're using, for example, Ghostly Embrace, you're reducing the amount of damage that is coming in by 15%. You're also slow and rooting your opponent, and this basically allows you to have a little bit of mobility while you're fighting, because of course I would be using channeled acceleration, which would give me a little bit more mobility. I currently don't have the slot for it because I'm working on the quest today. Hopefully I'll finish that today, so I'll have it, and of course I'll be running that in place of what I was running, which was the Skeletal Mage. This ability is amazing for setting up burst. Between when you're ready to hit people with your AoE, you really want to have this ability on your bar. As you can see, it's a fairly large area. Each person hit is slowed by 50% for 5 seconds, and of course they receive the minor maim debuff, reducing their damage done by 15%, but it also roots 3 people. As you can see, there are 3 patches, and each patch will root someone for up to 4 seconds, which allows you to line up a blast bone. So you would blast bone into an alt, into a root for and slow, so that they're literally going to be moving at about this pace. And what that does is it either forces them to block the entire the entire ability, as well as the blast bone, as well as whatever else damage that your team is doing. Or what happens after you go ahead and root everybody, well, typically what they will do is they will dodge. When that happens, of course, they're going to be taking an enormous amount of damage because the damage from the Colossus is area of effect. So you basically would want to use it in areas where you can set up, for example, like in a small stairway, whether on a bridge or if you're turning a corner, and then you could root everybody and then of course drop your ultimate, as it covers a huge amount of area. So you can root into a blast bone, into a Colossus, and it does a ridiculous amount of area damage. The other thing that's important to understand is that Ricochet, despite being slower in terms of its animation compared to Crushing Shock and how quickly Crushing Shock will hit your target, Ricochet will do an additional 20% damage. When your opponent gets low, you're going to be proccing the, where is it? The Grave Lord buff called Death Kneel. As you can see there, the current bonus for me, because I'm running 1, 2, and 3 Grave Lord abilities, is that when my opponent gets low, my critical chance is increased by 30%. Ricochet, of course, does excellent damage. I've hit people for around between 4.5 and 5.5k on a crit, and of course it will bounce. Every third one will bounce to additional targets, to up to 2 additional targets, and deal 20% extra damage. That is a lot of damage that Ricochet does compared to Crushing Shock. Of course, I am using the stun from the two-handed from a destructive staff, the flame breach, and of course stalking blast bones. The only real problem that I can say that I've ever come across, and I only PvP, and I primarily only do battlegrounds. And what I can say, the thing where blast bones will get hung up are where there are big patches of slows. For example, if someone was using an ice staff and they were using Wall of Elements, or if, for example, you were fighting a Magicka Sork and he dropped like a negate, the blast bones will get stuck and CC'd in the negate, causing it to get hung up. But for the most part, I have not had blast bones bug out on me. I have done probably at this point over 100 battlegrounds between the pre-50s and of course the 50 BGs, as I primarily, the only content that I do is battlegrounds. I PvE to get my character to PvP status, and then all I do is battlegrounds. On occasion I might do some open world. I have not open world with this class yet, primarily because my mount is shit. It's 12% and I'm not about to go into Cyrodiil with a mount this slow. The other thing that I can say, the only other problem that I can say that you will have is the way the class works. Literally, you must keep Blast Bones, Intensive Mender, as well as Mortal Coil up 100% of the time. Especially your Mortal Coil and especially your Intensive Mender. So literally on every single engagement, even before you buff, I would say immediately cast your Blast Bones. The moment you take any sort of damage, even if you preemptively cast it, it is fine. The reason being because the Summoner's Armor reduces the cost by 12%. So this is a really cheap ability to precast. It's a really cheap ability that you can precast so that it's up, so that when you do take damage, it's already there ready to heal you. The same thing with Blast Bones. Blast Bones is reduced by 12%, as well as the Intensive Mender, but also in the passive, in the Grave Lord passive, there is another passive here. When your Blast Bone, Skeletal Mage, or Spirit Mender dies, the cost of your next Blast Bones, Skeletal Mage, and Spirit Mender is reduced by 25%. So this becomes really cheap to cast in the area of around 1200 Magicka, as well as about 13 or so hundred Magicka to cast the Blast Bones. That gives quite a bit of sustain, where you should without fail be keeping these abilities up 100% of the time, because you want to proc the sustain from the Living Death. This is while you have a Blast Bones, Skeletal Mage, or Spirit Mender active, your Magicka and Stamina recovery is increased by 200%. And of course, this is affected by, if you, for example, you use a pot, if you're using a tripod, as well as the passives from the extra sustain you get from evocation. And of course, if you are running a 5-1-1, if you're using Windwalker, the passive, you'll gain an extra 4%, as well as from the pot. And of course, because I am running Willows, it also benefits from the Willows passive as well. For each 124, it increases the abilities, the passive there, by quite a bit. So you don't want to basically have either one of these down. The moment you're able to recast your Blast Bones, you should. I use a timer so that I can see how much longer the ability is going to last, and I recast it on cooldown. Another thing that's very valuable is keeping your opponents debuffed, rooted, so that they're either forced to go back to their back bar and either use forward momentum, or DK will have to flap his wings. And it gives you little breaks in the amount of damage that you take, because it allows you to move. The amount of damage, of course, that you take is reduced by 15%, and of course it is area of effect, so if you're fighting multiple opponents, all of them will do reduced damage. And of course, because you're lack mobility, you really want to keep that ability up for as long as you can. For the duration of the fight, as well as making sure every time your Mortal Coil goes down, you immediately reproc it. The same with Intensive Mender. You shouldn't really have an issue being able to proc your Mortal Coil. You'll have 3 different opportunities to do so. One, right after your Blast Bone dies, it'll hit your target, it'll drop a corpse, you immediately turn around and you hit Mortal Coil. Secondly is when Summoner's Armor reaches the 10-second mark, you can cast it. Pay attention to the timers. You should have buff timers, and of course, the moment it reaches below 10 seconds, you can recast it and it will drop a skeleton, and you can immediately tether that for the healing. As you can see there, the heal comes in literally every half second. It is affected, of course, by critical, which is why I run quite a bit of spell critical. It is also affected by critical damage from the Mundstone, the Shadow. So you're going to be critically healing for an additional 13%. So your critical heals will be 0.63 or 1.63 instead of the 0.5, which means that both your Mender as well as the heals you get from Mortal Coil, and of course the little healing that you get from Entropy, will all have a high chance to crit, because we're running 40%. As you can see right here, we're running 41% and of course 63% critical. So you're going to get a lot of healing out of the Intensive Mender, and of course out of the other morph here, the Mortal Coil morph. As like I said, it comes in every half second, and you're going to get a lot of heals over time. And this is what makes the Magicka Necromancer that lacks mobility able to hold its ground against multiple opponents. And so what it allows you to do, it allows you to clump up opponents, because most of the time it's going to be a lot of melee characters, or like stand builds or Magicka DK, whether you're fighting Nightblades, whether they're Magicka or Stamina, for example a Magicka melee Nightblade, and of course the plethora of stamina builds that are out there. This gives you the opportunity to keep them all rooted and slowed, and of course debuffed, and set up for a Pestilent Colossus. into, of course, a blast bones, which will do a large amount of damage. And all you have to do is focus one person, and your ricochet will bounce on every third hit, so that for the duration of this ability, at the very least, one cast of your ricochet will hit 2 other opponents into, of course, a bone blast. And of course, you'll be running the CC on your front bar, so if the person isn't CC'd, you'll be able to CC them for a large amount of damage. And of course, during that time period, don't forget to keep your buffs up. This should be on 24/7 in a fight. This ability and this ability is more important than making sure that you're buffed, because like I said, the first thing you want to do is cast your blast bones, then buff up, and then make sure that your mender is up once you start taking some considerable damage. But like I said, it's really cheap to precast. You can take a look at the cost. Let's see if it'll show up here. I think it was a little bugged earlier. Yeah, it's not showing up where I can click on the reductions. I'm not sure why. Let me see, maybe there's a toggle here. I know they've made a little bit of changes to the builder. I just don't see the toggle. Yeah, I'm not seeing it. But in any event, feel free to check out the build. It is called battleofthebuild.com. I have posted my hybrid Necromancer. I'll post a link to some of the gameplay. Necromancer as a hybrid plays beautifully. You're super tanky. You do fairly decent damage as a hybrid build. You can take a look at some of the tooltips I can display right here. And taking a look at, where is it? Hybrid Necro. That's not it. Here, it's my Hundings Necro. So you can see what some of the tooltips look like. 6400 on the Ransack. I'm using the Necrotic Potency. You can see Mortal Coil coming in just at 18k. I'm using Ghostly Embrace. I've got 12k tooltip on my Blast Bones and no CP. And of course I'm using Hexproof, and then of course I'm using the Pestilence there. Works out really good. You're able to have fairly good both weapon, as you can see, weapon and spell damage, and spell and weapon critical, and able to take advantage of the Magicka morphs here, and here. It gives you a lot of utility on a sword and shield build for an immense amount of healing and sustain, while being able to utilize your Blast Bones into a Ransack, and of course Invasion for the ranged CC. So there's a lot of different builds that I posted here, or maybe you're looking for melee Magicka Nightblade. I've also posted my previous Wrathstone build, of course with gameplay, why I chose these abilities, the gear sets that I used, the traits, the theory behind it, and of course I will be posting the new build. This build is updated for Elsewhere. If you're looking to play a Cloaking Nightblade, I have another build that's more powerful than this one, which is a non-cloaking melee Magicka Nightblade. I also have my DK build. There's numerous builds if you're looking for a light armor DK, or if you're looking for a heavy armor DK. I also posted my Paladin build, which is a very good no CP BG Paladin playstyle for the Templar, utilizing heavy armor, sword and shield with a back bar 2H, and of course I always post all of the important stats, the 4500 weapon and spell damage. You can see the stats here for yourself. Numerous builds here for the no CP battlegrounds. I always post an in-depth build video, of course with gameplay. Feel free to take a look at it. It's battleofthebuild.com, and of course I will be streaming later tonight on Twitch at Infamous with 2 S's. You can see it right here, Infamous NYC. Feel free to check me out tonight. I'll be on around 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you like the content, feel free to drop me a follow. Every follow counts. It lets me know that people enjoy the content that I'm creating, and feel free to thumbs up on the video. Thanks very much. Comment if you have any questions in regards to any of the build. Hit me up in game or on Twitch. and I'm happy to do my best to help you create whatever build, whatever playstyle that you're looking for. I'm playing this for the better part of 5 years, and I primarily do PvP. Thanks for watching. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe.